This week's Torah reading of Parshat Korach is a parsha that seems always to hit me in the face because we unfortunately don't need the Torah to plunge us into the midst of the kind of debates and arguments and challenges and conspiracy theories and concerns that the parsha of Korach presents to us each year in depth. And what the Torah is doing here is it's giving us the paradigm of what Pirkei Avot, what Ethics of the Fathers refers to as machloket shelo l'shem shamayim, a debate, an argument, a difference which is not for the sake of heaven. And we'll get into the nuances of what that means, not for the sake of heaven. And of course, in Pirkei Avot, it contrasts it to a machloket l'shem shamayim, which is the example of the differences of opinion which divided the students of Hillel and the students of Shammai, who debated up and down and argued and differed in very fundamental, comprehensive points of Torah. And hence in the Mishnah, which pulls together and is the compendium of these Talmudic discussions, we often see Beit Hillel saying A and Beit Shammai saying B. So the Torah is contrasting, holding these two up as diametric opposites. And what I want to do tonight is to clarify exactly what this distinction is by looking at the context of the events of Parshat Korach and the background to those events. So what happened with Korach is, since the debate when chronologically it happened, and we're going to discuss that in a moment, but according to the simple reading of the Torah, the direct chronology in the Torah is following the spies going out in the beginning, in the early parts of the second year out from the Exodus, and coming back and bringing their negative report, and the Jewish people despairing of ever going to the land, and God proclaiming that that generation which stood at Mount Sinai, and that generation which exited Egypt under these miraculous conditions would not in fact enter the land which was the intended plan, but rather would die out in the coming 39 years as they wandered around in the wilderness. And only the coming generation, those who were 20 and younger at this point, and all those who would be born to take the place of those who pass away, those would in fact be the people who would enter the promised land. So it creates a disjointment between the miraculous redemption in Egypt, the Jewish people receiving the Torah at Sinai, and eventually with this long pause in the middle of 40 years now, and it will be with the successor to Moshe, it would be only with Joshua's leadership that the Jewish people would enter the land of Israel, decoupling the real goal of the Exodus in terms of who the people are that are involved in leaving Egypt and entering the land of Israel, which is a weakening of the tradition. It's a weakening of the strength which these bookend events were meant to launch us into the land of Israel. And instead, it would be a different generation. It would be people who did not know enslavement. It would be people who did not know the rescue of the 10 plagues firsthand. It would not be the people who saw the sea split before them. It would not be the people who heard God speak to them at Sinai. It would rather be that next generation who would come in, fight battles against the local people, conquer the land of Israel, and settle therein. That's the sad repercussion of those events. Just after that, and this is debated, but just after that, chronologically, the Torah presents us with the rebellion of Korach. The rebellion of Korach is that Korach, who was from the priestly family, he was destined to be a Levite, one of the three family groupings of Shevet Levi, but not included in the Kohanim, who would only be the direct descendants of Aaron, rose up, and with him came three distinct people who are mentioned in the Torah, Datan V'Aviron and On ben Pelas, an unknown person until now, and 250 leaders. And what they did is they got up and they presented a theory or various theories to the Jewish people, all of which had the same theme, that Moshe was a corrupt leader, that what Moshe was teaching the Jewish people was not the prophetic words of God. He was becoming a dishonest broker in terms of being the person who brought the Torah down from Sinai and presented it to the Jewish people, and before their own eyes went into the tent of meeting, came out and said, this is what God has taught us. And each group seized on different aspects of that teaching, and in their minds they delegitimized Moshe. And under Korach's leadership and as the spokesperson, Korach articulates an attack on Moshe and Aaron's leadership and says, we're all holy, very lofty idea. We all stood together at Sinai. You're consolidating leadership within your own family and your own tribe, and we don't buy it. We believe you're doing it at your own prompting. We no longer trust you as God's spokesperson and as the critical prophet of God. Why is this so important? It's so important because when you look at Maimonides' 13 principles of faith, 2 of those principles name Moshe by name. That's how essential is his veracity and his standing upon Mount Sinai is to the Jewish people. And the Jewish people witnessed this. At Mount Sinai, it was only Moshe who stood atop the mountain. When God spoke, and according to, let's take the opinion in the Talmud, that he spoke only the first 2 of the 10 commandments directly to all the people saw that. And then the people said, no, Moshe, you let God present them to you and you present them to us because it's too overwhelming of an experience for us to deal directly with God. So it's not a concept of there being a middleman. The entire nation is holy. The entire nation stood at Mount Sinai. But it was a component of the fact that this absolute face-to-face, so to speak, communication with God was beyond the endurance of everyone but Moshe. And as Maimonides codifies, and every Jewish prophet throughout history, none before him or after him could manage such an intense contact with God. So Moshe was unique. And that has to be the case because that's why the Torah, as we say, the 5 books of Moses, they come to us with a unique stature, with a unique everlasting stamp of God that says no future prophet, no matter how imbued that prophet, man or woman, seems to be with the voice of God, can uproot, revise, change, or dispute anything that's within these 5 books of Moses that were conveyed to the Jewish people through Moshe. That's what they attacked. And it's obvious that the whole experience of Exodus and experience of standing at Sinai would have not just been interrupted by a period of time and a lost generation, but rather would have become disrupted forever once that dispute were to take hold, once that uncertainty were to take hold, once that article of faith were to be undermined, that would have been the end. And indeed, there is a medrash which says that the sun and the moon and the stars withdrew from nourishing the world at the spectacle of the rebellion of Korach, indicating the idea that since there's an ultimate meaning and purpose in God's creation, and the sun and the moon and the stars are the main luminaries and centerpieces on the physical level of that creation, they themselves would give up on sustaining their jobs and their roles within creation if in fact Korach were to succeed. Knowing that, Moshe calls out to God for a dramatic conclusion. And indeed, when the dust settles, literally, the earth had opened up, swallowed Korach, his family, key followers, the 250 leaders who followed him died in an unusual, came with fire pans of incense to present them to before God. They were consumed by that fire, and in total, close to 15,000 Jewish people lost their lives, confirming forever the veracity and the truth and the correctness of these two principles of faith, that Moshe was indeed the greatest, most intense prophet of God that was and will be, and that therefore the Torah that he taught us cannot be challenged by any force on earth. That's the story. When did the story happen? So surprisingly, Rashi, who oftentimes shuffles the cards, so to speak, in terms of the sequence of events, Rashi places this event as happening before the sin of the spies. And the Ibn Ezra, an even earlier commentary, does the same thing. And they pick up on different trends of thought, because what they're wondering about is, how could Moshe be challenged? There's no basis whatsoever to feel that Moshe was taking personal benefit or pride, or that his central position was going to his head. The Torah records no loss of faith and sincerity and devotion to the Jewish people on the part of Moshe whatsoever. And we know the Torah has a micro focus on the shortcomings of the leaders of the Jewish people and points them out to us. And here there is none to be found. So what was the basis of this? And how this basis unfolds in the eyes of these different commentaries is very important to understand. I'll start with the words of the Malbim, not in the same category of authority as Rashi and the Ramban or the Ibn Ezra. But the Malbim says the takeoff point was that when they walked away from Mount Sinai, the lesson that the Jewish people took to heart was, wow, Hashem spoke to each and every one of us. We each received the Torah. And therefore, over time, it sort of sunk into them, this idea that we're each Moshes. Do we really need Moshe? Does Moshe really speak on behalf of God? After all, I was there. Now, the difficulty with what the Malbim presents is that the Mount Sinai was blocked off, so no Jewish person could set foot on it. Only Moshe went up. Aaron goes up partway, the elders go up partway, so they're already distinguished in a hierarchical setup, but only Moshe was on top. And the people themselves, according to the Talmudic opinion, begged off of hearing it directly. Yet somehow, over time, with different challenges and different frustrations, the Jewish people came to settle on this idea of kulam kedoshim, as Korach expressed it. We're all equally holy. And the truth is, we are all equally holy. When the Torah says, kedoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani, be holy, act in holiness because I, God, am a holy being. So the Torah is saying, yes, each and every one of us is created in the image of God. Each and every one of us at this moment underestimates the holiness potential and qualities within us that remain undeveloped, that remain to be tapped into. Yet, of course, that doesn't equate to an equality with Moshe. What Rashi digs into and what the Ramban dig into are more personal concerns. But let's look at Rashi first of all. Rashi famously says, and the first words in the parsha, and it's chapter 16, sentence 1, Vayikach Korach. Korach took, and there's no object to that. What did he take? So Rashi, quoting a Medrash Tanchuma, says he took himself. So Rashi is going with a psychological approach. Rashi says he separated himself from the tzibur, from the community. And we know in Pirkei Avot, it's stressed several times. Don't separate yourself from the community. And we'll discuss in more depth what that means. But in other words, he became a loner, and he started looking at events as an outsider, looking in. Ibn Ezra stresses the idea that there was a series of revelations that took place, which are as follows. The firstborn forfeited their right to be the priests and the Kohanim and to handle the service in the tabernacle. Now, if you think about it, as long as the firstborn had that privilege and that responsibility, every Jewish family was directly engaged in the service of the sanctuary, because any two Jewish people who would have a firstborn child, firstborn son as the way it unfolds, but any of us, that child would become devoted like a Kohen or like a Levite, and they would be charged with that responsibility. So when God, after the sin of the golden calf, said no longer will the firstborn have that privilege, there was an insult and injury to every Jewish person. Oh, no longer can I aspire, can I dream about my descendant, maybe my son, maybe my grandson, maybe my great-grandson, would emerge even to be the high priest in the temple. So you see what it does is it took away the sharing of opportunity of leadership. And that festered within the Jewish people, and that came out. Now, the Ramban, Nachmanides, looks at this very differently. And Nachmanides adds a factor to his discussion. And he says clearly, disagreeing with Rashi, this event, the rebellion against Moshe, the beloved leader, the rescuer of the Jewish people, who not only showed up in Egypt and put his shoulder to the torment of the Jewish people and argued with Pharaoh and risked everything to take them out, he was also the one who stood at the sea and oversaw the splitting of the sea. He was also the one who prayed on behalf of the Jewish people after the sin of the golden calf to rescind God's initial decree that the people would all perish there. So how could they rebel against him? So what the Ramban says clearly is it's only after they all had a death sentence placed upon them after the sin of the spies, and they were faced with the stark reality that I am going to die in this God-forsaken wilderness. Now, it wasn't a God-forsaken wilderness because manna fell from heaven and God's cloud protected them and God's pillar of fire guided them. So if anything, it was a very special, drawn-out experience, incubating the Jewish people into a close, durable relationship with God. But each person understood, I'm not going to make it out on the other end. I'm never going to enter the land. It's only going to be for my children. It's only going to be for my grandchildren. And unlike the greatness that an Abraham, an Isaac, or a Jacob, who shown the future, were able to understand it's not going to be now, but it'll be for my descendants. They could buy into that totally. These people weren't able to do it. So the Ramban says, then what happens? Then each and every sling and arrow and insult and frustration comes out from within them. And hence, what Nachmanides does here, what the Ramban interprets is, Vayikach Korach, what did Korach take? And the way he puts it is he took counsel from within himself. Those nagging voices, those voices that each of us most likely have heard throughout our lives. It's not fair. It's not right. I'm not getting my due. Someone else is getting more than me. These type of internal debates that take place with people, they were able to burst forth beyond the regulation of the Jewish people at this time because they were under a death sentence that they were not going to go into the land. And that brought about like a depression, a despair, a sense of abandoned by God. and they weren't able, therefore, to any longer deal with themselves as individuals. Now, I want to make a contrast. In last week's class, when we talked about the tzitzit and wrapping ourselves in these garments that remind us of God's closeness, there the Torah was giving us a frame of reference, that it's not just search out the world, have eyes that roam and say, this will be more pleasurable, this makes more sense, this makes less sense. That tzitzit took care of. It gave us a framework of saying there's a creator of the world, and God has given us direction and guidelines and barriers and limitations. And by staying within those within that, we can grow to be in truth and stature and to become far greater than otherwise humanly possible. This is something different. This is being undermined from within. It's not a question of looking out into the world and then becoming bedazzled, as, for example, Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden. Look at that fruit. Look how tasty. Look how desirous it is. Why should we restrain ourselves? No, this comes from within. I think it's a very important idea for us all to think about. It's your own inner voices pulling the carpet out from under you and telling you there's a conspiracy here. Aaron's Moshe's brother. The Levites are his tribe. We're all holy. We're standing at Sinai. Why do we need to be so reliant on him? Why is his opinion ultimately more valuable than mine? And hence you get mockery. You get the idea that Korach says is, oh, you have to have a blue thread on your tzitzis. What if you have the whole garment made out of blue threads? Do you still have to add a blue thread? Isn't that ridiculous? This whole sense of dredging these ideas forward that are expressed in the words of Korach as he attacks and leads this rebellion, which caught the attention of the entire Jewish people and seeded doubt that I think still haunts us today, all came from within these internal voices. So then let's get back to the idea. Let's look at this machloket. The way Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, expresses it, there's two paradigms. There's a debate, argument for the sake of heaven. That's Hillel and Shammai. Hillel and Shammai, again, what's their goal? Their goal is very clear. We want to find the truth of how Hashem wants us to serve him and the true pathway that God is giving us to draw close to God so that we can fulfill our purpose, so that we can live lives imbued with our internal godliness. So Hillel and Shammai saw things differently, as people by nature do, but they always clung to the same reason for debating these issues. When it comes to Korach, again, the nuance in the words in Pirkei Avot and Ethics of the Fathers is, it doesn't say the dispute between Korach, his followers, and Moshe. It rather says the dispute between Korach and his followers. And many commentaries on Pirkei Avot point out that because each person had their own argument, their own philosophy, their own reason that they were rising up. They just shared a common enemy, which was Moshe, and throwing off the sense of responsibility to uphold the Torah as it was being taught to them. They wanted nothing between themselves and God, so to speak, an unbridled sense, not of taking from the world, but an unbridled access to God. I want to know that my grandson could be the one who goes into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. And if it can't be my grandson, then I'm ready to rebel. The guy on the other hand says, well, your grandson, what about my grandson? Or the other guy says, well, what about the fact that I'm from the tribe of Levi, I'm a Levite myself, but I don't have the privileges that Moshe is giving to Aaron. It's no cohesion of viewpoint. It's simply a cohesion of discontent. And according to Nachmanides, it's a cohesion of discontent drawing and flowing from each person's individual sense of despair, depression, and hopelessness. So what do we learn from this? What can we take away from this? So first of all, what we need to take away from this is whenever we are in dispute with someone else, a husband to a wife, a parent to a child, whatever the context is, whatever community meeting we go to, and we're just disgusted by the direction things are taking. Let's pull back. What is community for? What is our goal? Maybe we need to restate these goals. Maybe we need to remind ourselves as a Jewish community, yes, we're there for one another because we see ourselves as one united people. But it's not this group versus this group. It's not this theory of conspiracy, which speaks to me, and your theory of conspiracy, which speaks to you, and your insult and your bad feeling. So let's just all get together and let's just be sure we can challenge those in authority and bring about a new era in the world. And we see a lot of that on the political level, but we're talking on the personal level, we're talking on the religious level, we're talking on the Jewish community level, we're talking on the level of recognizing the fact that we are given a task as the distinguished people of the world to present ideas and ways of life and values and live those values before the whole world. Hillel and Shammai disagreed vehemently, but they never lost sight of the fact that their goal was exactly the same and that they were walking the same path together. And hence, as I've mentioned previously in this class, they were never reluctant to express the other one's viewpoint even before their own, because they recognized the fact that everyone's heart was in the right place. And it wasn't my view against your view. It was a true sense of how do we all achieve what we're meant to achieve. This gives us a new definition of what it means to be part of a community. Being part of a community at times means being the low man on the totem pole. And at times it means that those 5 things that matter most to me are just not the priority of the community right now, but let me still stay behind the community because in and of itself, strengthening a community strengthens each and every one of us and enables us to fulfill our purpose. It emphasizes the idea that doubts, self-doubts, we need to deal with them optimistically and positively and really try with all of our might to overcome a sense of despair or depression, especially when it comes to decision making. How do we get to any of these places? It's not an easy question to answer. It begins with a sense that God is tremendously involved in all the nuances of each one of our lives and in the direction that the world is taking. Knowing that alone pushes aside despair, and sometimes with some good therapy and some guidance and a lot of support and friendship, it can even get us beyond a sense of depression into a sense of recognizing the fact that, wow, challenges are formidable right now. The immediate future is bleak. That vision I had when I walked through the split sea of having a home in Netanya and listening to the Mediterranean crash against the beach each night, it's not going to happen. It may only be my child. It may only be my grandchild. It may be your grandchild. That's okay, because the context is in creating and sustaining an effort within the world that ultimately speaks loudly and clearly that there is an honorable place for God in the world. There's an honorable place for each and every person to put their shoulder to the wheel in terms of supporting and acquiescing to the agenda, to the circumstances which God chooses for us. And when we see the challenges, to figure out together how we can overcome those challenges, but not to fall into small little groups and start going after one another. And I think these are the takeaways. They're important takeaways. The dispute between Nachmanides and Ibn Ezra and Rashi in terms of could these events have happened before the Synod of Spies or not? They're very telling in terms of the way each one viewed human nature. These are the nuances. For us, the conclusion has to be paramount. Be part of a community in a way that's truly constructive to the most overreaching goals. And even at times when your voice seems to be going completely not heard, overridden, and your belief in the prominence that you should enjoy is not becoming fulfilled, those are moments of challenge to think about Korach, to think about him and his camp and what they ultimately accomplished for the world, which was a weakening of the mission of the Jewish people, as compared to Hillel and Shammai and their students, who ultimately enlighten all of us to a deeper, more robust, more complete understanding of the path that Hashem wants us to tread. And please God, it's not a simple thing to achieve unity, but it's certainly never going to be achieved through an attack or through undermining or through forming into groups. It's going to only be achieved by us with superhuman strength, clinging to the overall pursuit of being a nation of God, living in a world, representing all of the mitzvot that God has given us, and seeing them as opportunities to shine and to enlighten the world. And please God, we should somehow soon accomplish this.